Imagine you're walking down a highly familiar street in your own neighborhood. You know, every single crack in the pavement.
Right, the kind of route you could walk with your eyes closed.
Exactly. It's the middle of November in 1996 in Reading, Berkshire, England. And because it's November in the UK, the sun has long since set by the early evening.
It would be pitch black out.
Pitch black. It's illuminated only by that intermittent orange sodium glow of streetlights cutting through the cold air.
Yeah, that very specific, harsh lighting.
Right. And you are simply stepping out of your front door to run an errand that is so entirely mundane, so completely routine, that you probably don't even say a formal goodbye to the person you live with.
You're just running out for a second.
You're walking to a fast food restaurant to pick up dinner. It's a walk that, on a normal day, takes exactly 3 minutes from your door to the counter.
3 minutes.
Okay, let's unpack this. 3 minutes. If you think about the span of 3 minutes in the context of your daily life, it is almost nothing.
It's the length of a single pop song on the radio.
Yeah, or the exact amount of time it takes to stand in your kitchen and, wait for a kettle to boil. It is a vanishingly small window of time.
It really is.
Yet within that infinitesimally small window, a life can be completely derailed, violently interrupted, and transformed into one of the most baffling unsolved mysteries a region has ever seen.
Which is just terrifying to think about.
It is. Our mission today is to meticulously reconstruct the biography and the timeline of a 47-year-old woman named Vera Holland.
We need to trace everything.
We're going to trace the events from her life in 1996, examining every granular forensic detail. We'll look at the psychology of the timeline, the logistical nightmare of the massive police dragnet that followed, all the way to the ongoing developments of the present day.
You know, the analogy of the boiling kettle, it perfectly frames the immense logistical challenge of this entire investigation.
How so?
Well, we are looking at a case defined by a terrifying, almost paralyzing contradiction. On one hand, we have an incredibly tight geographic radius and a highly specific timeline.
Right, 3 minutes, one street.
Exactly. And we possess an abundance of physical clues. We have precise forensic data regarding the disposal of the body, detailed descriptions of phantom vehicles moving in the dark, and, well, one of the largest mobilizations of police resources in the history of the Thames Valley Force.
The scale of the response was just massive.
It was unprecedented. Yet, despite this overwhelming accumulation of raw data, the authorities and the family are left with a profound void.
Which is incredibly frustrating.
This raises an important question. How do so many distinct, tangible clues fail to catch a killer?
I mean, how does it happen?
How does a person vanish in the time it takes to listen to a song, leaving behind a massive, complicated trail of physical evidence that ultimately leads to a judicial dead end?
To even begin to understand the magnitude of that question, we first need to comprehensively understand the reality of Vera Holland's life before that Thursday evening.
We need the context of who she was.
Exactly. In 1996, Vera was 47 years old. She lived on St. Barnabas Road in Shinfield Rise, which is a densely populated residential area in South Reading.
It's a busy, established neighborhood.
Yeah, very much so. She lived with her third husband, Brian Holland. And one of the most crucial defining details about their life together is their occupation.
Right, the milk round.
Yes. They shared a milk delivery round in the nearby market town of Wokingham.
Which is a fascinating detail from an investigative standpoint.
I mean, when you think about a milk delivery round, especially in that analog era of the mid-90s, it tells you a tremendous amount about a person's daily routine.
Their physical capabilities, their situational awareness.
Exactly. This is not a sedentary office job where you sit behind a desk for 8 hours. A milk round requires waking up in the extremely early hours of the morning, long before dawn.
Usually around 2 or 3 in the morning.
Right. And it requires immense physical stamina. I mean, you are constantly getting in and out of a vehicle, carrying crates of heavy glass bottles.
Building up and down steep driveways in the dark.
Navigating icy paths in the winter. Furthermore, it implies an intimate, exhaustive knowledge of the local geography.
You have to know every corner.
Someone who delivers milk knows the streets, the alleys, the dead ends, the blind corners, and most importantly, they know the normal rhythms of the neighborhoods they serve.
They know who is awake at what time.
And they know what constitutes unusual activity in the dark.
That is a vital piece of context that investigators immediately had to factor into their victimology profile.
It really changes how you view her as a victim.
It establishes that Vera was absolutely not someone who was timid or unfamiliar with navigating local streets in the dark.
No, not at all.
She was highly accustomed to being out in low-light conditions and would have possessed a deeply ingrained sense of spatial awareness.
She knew her environment.
She was physically capable, active, and understood her surroundings. This makes the precise events of November 14th even more unsettling.
Let's get into that specific timeline.
The established timeline dictates that at exactly 6:10 p.m., Vera left her home on St. Barnabas Road. Her destination was the KFC restaurant situated on Shinfield Road.
And as we established, this was a strictly 3-minute walk from her front door.
Right. We must carefully consider the physical environment at 6:10 p.m. on a Thursday in mid-November.
The weather, the light.
The sun would have set around 4:15 p.m., meaning it had been completely dark for nearly 2 hours by the time she stepped outside.
But it wasn't the dead of night.
No, 6:10 p.m. is absolutely not the dead of night. It is the peak of the evening rush hour.
People coming home from work.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Commuter traffic on Shinfield Road is heavy, dinner is being prepared, and there is generally a high level of ambient activity in a residential area bordering a commercial thoroughfare.
So it's busy.
Very. For an abduction to occur in this specific busy window requires a perpetrator who is either incredibly brazen, operating with terrifying practiced speed, or someone who is familiar to the victim, allowing them to intercept her without causing a scene or triggering a defensive reaction.
Wait, I need to stop you there. I want to firmly push back on the idea of a completely unseen interception, because we have to visualize exactly how she looked that evening.
Her clothing was very distinct.
Incredibly distinctive. According to the missing person report, she was wearing a 3/4 length pink coat, a green tartan skirt, a black jumper, and black shoes.
That is not a subtle outfit.
A 3/4 length pink coat and a green tartan skirt do not simply blend into the shadows, even in low light. This is highly visible clothing.
It's practically designed to stand out under sodium streetlights.
Right. Which makes the next fact so incredibly difficult to reconcile. There was absolutely no sign of her on any CCTV cameras ever reaching her destination.
None at all.
It is firmly believed by investigators that she never even made it to the restaurant. Are you telling me that not a single eyewitness, not a passing motorist, and no grainy surveillance camera caught a flash of a pink coat at rush hour?
It's hard to fathom.
How is a geographic interception point established on literally zero visual data?
That is precisely the paradox that haunted the initial investigation. To understand how she could vanish without a visual trace, it is essential to contextualize the surveillance technology of 1996.
Right, it's not like today.
Not at all. We are not talking about the modern era where nearly every residential doorbell has a high-definition motion sensor camera.
And every passing vehicle acts as a rolling digital surveillance device with dash cams.
Exactly. In 1996, CCTV was a highly expensive luxury, primarily restricted to commercial premises, bank ATMs, and major traffic intersections.
And even then, the quality was terrible.
The footage was often recorded on degraded, constantly reused VHS tapes with very low frame rates,
making identifying features incredibly difficult in the dark.
The fact that a woman wearing brightly colored clothing was not captured on any commercial cameras near the KFC strongly signifies the geographic point of interception.
Meaning they know roughly where it had to happen.
By deduction, it proves she was taken almost immediately after stepping away from the immediate vicinity of her home.
Before she could reach the main road.
Yes, before she reached the heavily trafficked, commercialized, and therefore monitored zones of Shinfield Road. If she had made it to the main road, the statistical probability of a sighting, either human or electronic, skyrockets.
So it had to happen fast.
Therefore, the interception happened in the quiet residential space in a matter of seconds.
That brings us to the timeline of the reporting itself, which I really want to spend some serious time analyzing.
The delay in reporting her missing.
Yes. She leaves for a 3-minute walk at 6:10 p.m. Brian, her husband, officially reports her missing to the authorities at 10:45 p.m.
That is a gap of 4.5 hours.
I want to explore the agonizing psychology of that specific window of time. Because to an outsider, 4.5 hours might sound like a very long time to wait to call the police for a 3-minute errand.
It does sound suspicious if you don't break it down.
But put yourself in that living room. If someone you live with leaves to grab fast food down the street, you do not call the emergency services at 6:20 p.m.
No, you feel ridiculous.
You simply assume the queue at the restaurant is unusually long. By 6:45 p.m., you might feel a flicker of mild annoyance.
You figure maybe they ran into a neighbor on the pavement and stopped to chat, entirely losing track of time.
Exactly. By 7:30 p.m., the annoyance transitions into genuine concern. You might put your shoes on and walk the route yourself.
Checking the interior of the restaurant, scanning the pavements.
Right. You return home, hoping they took an alternate route and are just waiting in the kitchen.
And when they aren't there, the panic starts to set in.
By 8:30 p.m., you are calling the landlines of family members and close friends, asking if she stopped by.
The escalation from mundane domestic waiting to genuine, paralyzing panic is gradual.
It's agonizingly slow and filled with rationalizations. The 10:45 p.m. call to the police represents the absolute breaking point.
The moment where every single rational, benign explanation has been systematically exhausted.
And only the unthinkable remains.
Your breakdown of that psychological timeline is exactly how investigators must approach the initial hours of a missing person case.
They have to weigh all of that.
They have to differentiate between suspicious delay and natural human rationalization. The police receiving that call at 10:45 p.m. recognized immediately that this was serious.
Because it didn't fit her profile.
A woman disappearing mid-errand, leaving behind a spouse and a settled life without a word, does not fit the profile of a voluntary disappearance.
Especially without taking any belongings.
However, because the interception happened in that residential blind spot, this total lack of visual or electronic trace in the immediate environment essentially forced the police investigation to expand its radius outward immediately.
They couldn't just lock down the street.
They could not focus on a crime scene because they did not have one. They were blindly searching the surrounding geography, hoping the perpetrator made a mistake further down the line.
Was looking for anything out of place.
This outward expansion leads us to the events of 2 days later, miles away from the quiet domesticity of St. Barnabas Road.
Exactly. We move from the mundane evening of Thursday, November 14th, into a terrifying, silent void of information until the early hours of Saturday, November 16th.
That 35-hour gap.
At roughly 5:30 a.m., a member of the public contacts the fire service. They report a blaze burning intensely by the side of the A327 road.
Which is in an area situated between Shinfield and Arborfield.
Yes. This specific geographical location is known locally as Two Bridges, and the fire is situated at what is described as an illegal fly tipping site.
About 3 miles south of Vera's home.
I want to make sure we clearly define the environment of an illegal fly tipping site. This is not a sanctioned municipal dump.
No, it's very different.
It is an area, usually a lay-by, a desolate dirt track, or the edge of a rural field, where people covertly and illegally dump unwanted waste to avoid disposal fees.
We are talking about old, rotting furniture, construction debris.
Bags of household refuse, and discarded appliances. It is a chaotic, unregulated, visually overwhelming environment.
It's full of hazards and completely unlit.
It is often chosen by perpetrators precisely because it is desolate, entirely unmonitored by authorities, and covered in pre-existing garbage, making new additions difficult to spot.
It's the perfect place to hide something you don't want found quickly.
So, after the fire service arrived at Two Bridges and successfully extinguished the blaze, they began to sift through the smoking debris to ensure there were no underlying hotspots.
Standard protocol after a fire.
It was then that they made a horrific discovery. Vera Holland's body was found concealed within the remnants of the fire.
And she was wrapped in something very specific.
She had been wrapped inside a large carpet. Traces of her own blood were subsequently found on that carpet. She was only partially clothed, specifically found in her undergarments.
The rest of her clothing was elsewhere.
The rest of her highly distinctive outfit, the pink coat, the green tartan skirt, the black jumper, were found burning in the pile immediately alongside her.
What's fascinating here, and I use that word in a strictly clinical investigative sense, is the stark, deeply unsettling contrast between the methodology of the murder itself and the methodology used to dispose of the body.
They feel like two different crimes almost.
The post-mortem examination determined the official cause of death to be strangulation, and the pathologist noted severe bruising to her face,
indicating blunt force trauma prior to or during the asphyxiation.
Strangulation is an intensely personal, physically demanding, and inherently violent method of killing.
It's not distant or detached.
It requires close physical proximity, sustained eye contact, and significant prolonged physical exertion. It is a direct, brutal, and often emotionally charged act.
Right.
Yet, when we shift our focus to the disposal at Two Bridges, we see a complete behavioral shift toward disorganized, desperate, logistical countermeasures.
The fire, the dumping.
The body is moved 3 miles away.
Yeah.
While 3 miles is a very short distance to drive, it is an absolute physical impossibility to carry a deceased human body weighing over 100 pounds that distance.
Especially while it is wrapped in a heavy, rigid, unwieldy carpet.
This geographic reality dictates to investigators as an absolute certainty that the perpetrator had access to and utilized a vehicle.
They had to have driven her there.
Furthermore, we must rigorously analyze the state of her clothing. The victim was found partially clothed in her undergarments, while her outer garments were placed directly in the fire.
Which raises obvious questions about motive.
Crucially, the autopsy revealed absolutely no physical signs of sexual assault. Therefore, the removal of her clothing was not sexually motivated.
So why take them off?
It was a calculated, albeit crude, forensic countermeasure. The killer removed the outer layers, the coat, the skirt, the jumper, likely knowing, even in a state of panic, that these specific items would harbor the most significant evidence of the violent struggle.
The transfer evidence.
Yes. Those outer garments would contain the killer's shed DNA, their sweat, microscopic fibers from their own clothing, and perhaps hair.
By removing those specific garments and attempting to incinerate them, the killer was actively trying to sever the physical, forensic link between themselves and the victim.
It shows a level of forensic awareness even amidst the chaos of a fly-tipping site disposal.
Here's where it gets really interesting and profoundly disturbing when you look at the raw mechanics of the timeline.
That dark gap.
Vera goes missing at 10 p.m. on the 14th. She's discovered burning at 5:30 a.m. on the 16th. That leaves a dark gap of more than 35 hours.
Which is an eternity in a murder investigation.
Where was she during that immense span of time? The forensic reality of the carpet and the fire suggests a terrifying sequence.
She was intercepted, killed, wrapped in this heavy carpet.
And then stored somewhere, a garage, a shed, an empty room, for over a full day before the killer made the calculated decision to transport her to the fly-tipping site and set the fire in the early hours of Saturday morning.
They had to sit with what they'd done for over 24 hours.
This unexplained 35-hour gap in time, coupled with the highly violent nature of the strangulation and the deliberate arson-based attempt to destroy forensic evidence, triggered an overwhelming response from law enforcement.
The scale of it was massive.
We are talking about one of the most intense, resource-heavy police mobilizations of the decade in the Thames Valley region.
They threw everything they had at it.
The police force immediately escalated the situation to a major incident, deploying 80 dedicated officers to work exclusively on this investigation in the first year alone.
Let us just look at the raw, staggering statistics of this dragnet.
It's hard to even wrap your head around.
At the height of the investigation, officers systematically interviewed 1,669 people.
That's practically a small town.
They took 777 formal written statements. They printed and physically distributed over 100,000 leaflets to the local population, appealing for any microscopic scrap of information.
To truly comprehend the gravity of those numbers, we must once again ground ourselves in the logistical, analog realities of 1996 policing.
It wasn't just running a database search.
Today, raw data is fed into centralized algorithmic databases that can instantly cross-reference names, vehicle registrations, phone pings, and financial records in fractions of a second.
In 1996, taking 777 formal statements meant hundreds upon hundreds of hours of face-to-face, shoe-leather detective work.
It meant teams of officers sitting in citizens' living rooms,
Manually writing down accounts on notepads, returning to the station to type those accounts onto paper using typewriters or early word processors.
filing them in massive physical folders and relying entirely on human memory, highlighters, and physical corkboards to spot inconsistencies or overlapping timelines.
It's incredibly labor-intensive, and distributing 100,000 leaflets was not a targeted digital ad campaign on a screen.
No, it required immense physical manpower.
They had to draft the copy, utilize printing presses, sort the stacks, and deploy officers to physically walk down thousands of individual streets.
Pushing paper through 100,000 individual letterboxes in the freezing November weather. The sheer bureaucratic and physical weight of that effort is staggering to contemplate.
In addition to this massive data collection, they utilized highly specific physical reenactments.
I found this part so eerie.
A female police officer, chosen for her similar height and build, dressed in clothing identical to the victim's distinctive pink coat and tartan skirt, physically walked the 3-minute route to the KFC at the exact time of evening Vera disappeared.
Hoping to jog the memories of regular commuters who might have seen something but didn't realize its significance.
They established physical road checks near the Two Bridges discovery site, stopping motorists in the early hours of the morning to ask if they traveled that specific rural route regularly.
And by February of 1997, they were erecting permanent, large-scale road signs in the area, pleading with the driving public for leads.
And as is standard procedure in any major homicide investigation, the intense, unyielding scrutiny immediately fell upon the inner circle.
It always starts close to home.
On December 17, 1996, just a month after the horrific discovery, police arrived at a home a few doors down from the victim's residence.
At 6:30 a.m., they arrested Vera's second husband and his new wife.
They were taken into police custody, subjected to 13 exhausting hours of intense questioning regarding their whereabouts and relationship dynamics, and ultimately released on police bail.
Hold on, I want to emphasize the neighborhood dynamics of that specific situation, because it is incredibly fraught.
It's a very unusual setup.
You have a woman who was murdered, living with her third husband, and her second husband lives just a few houses away on the exact same residential street.
The physical proximity alone makes the investigative environment incredibly complex and tense.
It really does. And the intense focus on the inner circle did not stop with the second husband. In January of 1997, Vera Holland, the third husband who made that agonizing 10:45 p.m. phone call reporting her missing, was himself arrested in connection with Vera's death.
He was held in police custody for a full day before being released on bail.
The friction between the police and the grieving family became immense. It culminated in Brian publicly threatening to take legal action against Thames Valley Police in March of 1997 over their handling of the case and his treatment as a suspect.
It's a completely fractured relationship at that point.
We also have to deeply examine the forensic invasion of their daily lives. The family home on St. Barnabas Road was entirely sealed off by police for 3 full days.
It became a primary scene.
Forensic teams in protective suits systematically dismantled the house, removing over 100 separate forensic samples. They took Brian's fingerprints. They drew his blood for forensic testing.
That level of intrusion is profound.
I want to pose a thought experiment to you, the listener. Imagine the profound psychological toll of this sequence of events.
It's unimaginable.
You endure the trauma of your spouse walking out the front door for a 3-minute errand and never returning, only to be found murdered in a horrific, violent manner days later.
And then, while you are attempting to process that shattering grief, the full, intimidating weight of the state's investigative apparatus turns directly upon you.
Your home, your sanctuary, is sealed off with police tape and treated as a primary potential crime scene for 3 days while strangers pull it apart, looking for microscopic traces of a murder.
You are placed in the back of a police car, taken into a sterile cell, questioned relentlessly as the prime suspect, and your blood is physically drawn.
The police were clearly operating on a strong initial hypothesis that the home itself might have been the primary site of the violence, despite the fact that she was reportedly seen leaving for the restaurant.
The decision to legally seal the primary residence for 3 days and extract over 100 discrete samples indicates that investigators were actively, aggressively attempting to either scientifically prove or conclusively disprove the timeline provided to them by the husband.
They couldn't just take his word for it.
They had to rule out the home as the murder location. If a violent strangulation resulting in severe facial bruising occurred inside the domestic space, it would almost certainly leave trace evidence.
Blood, skin cells, something.
In 1996, forensics teams would utilize early chemical reagents like luminol to detect trace amounts of blood that had been wiped away.
They would look for microscopic signs of a struggle.
Disrupted carpet fibers, cast-off blood spatter on skirting boards, defensive marks on furniture.
By thoroughly swabbing and testing the home environment and drawing the husband's blood to determine his specific blood type and preliminary genetic markers, they were systematically attempting to eliminate the most statistically probable suspect.
In homicide investigations, the spouse or domestic partner is always, without exception, the first point of inquiry. It is a necessary brutality of police work.
But they found nothing tying him to it.
When the rigorous physical search of the inner circle, the dual arrests, and the exhaustive forensic testing of the St. Barnabas Road home failed to yield any charges or definitive forensic links, the investigation was forced into a massive pivot.
They had to look outward again.
The investigators had cleared the immediate domestic sphere. They now had to rely entirely on the only physical artifacts the killer unwittingly brought into the wider environment.
The carpet.
Specifically, they had to deeply analyze the carpet used to transport the body, and they had to rely on the fractured, dark witness accounts of phantom vehicles seen moving around the fly-tipping site.
Let's focus our attention completely on that carpet, because the police launched a very specific, detailed public appeal regarding it in February of 1997.
The details they released to the press were incredibly precise.
This was not just a generic piece of cheap fabric. It was a substantial section of fawn or beige-colored carpet, described by experts as being of bedroom quality.
And we know the exact dimensions.
The dimensions were exact, 9 feet 4 inches long by 8 feet 2 inches wide.
That is a massive piece of material.
But the most critical clues were the physical, structural impressions left on the carpet itself.
The wear and tear.
On one side of the carpet, there were 2 distinct, deep, furniture-sized indentations, the kind of permanent marks left by the legs of a heavy wooden wardrobe, or a large bed pressing into the fibers over a period of years.
Which means it sat in one place for a long time.
On the opposite side, there were 2 circular holes cut out, specifically spaced to accommodate standard radiator pipes.
Furthermore, when the carpet was recovered from the fire and analyzed, forensic botanists found specific types of soil and living weeds growing directly on the underside of it.
Meaning it was stored outside.
This led investigators to a very specific, undeniable conclusion. This carpet had been stored outside, likely in a residential garden, an alleyway, or an exposed shed for a significant amount of time before it was retrieved and used to wrap the victim's body.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the carpet ceases to be just a piece of burned debris.
It becomes a fossilized map of a specific physical location.
The presence of the 2 radiator pipe holes and the heavy furniture indentations tells us a vivid story. This carpet lived in a very specific bedroom for years.
It was deliberately measured and cut to fit a specific wall, carefully maneuvering around specific plumbing fixtures.
The fact that it was then ripped up, removed, rolled, and left outside long enough to accumulate soil and sustain living weeds points to a very specific domestic scenario.
It points to a perpetrator who had unimpeded access to a property where internal renovations had recently taken place.
Somewhere where old flooring was casually discarded into the yard rather than being taken to a proper municipal dump.
We must also deeply analyze the pure logistics of moving this specific object. A piece of heavy-duty bedroom carpet measuring over 9 by 8 feet is incredibly bulky, stiff, and awkward to handle on its own.
Just rolling it up is a chore.
When you place a deceased human body inside it, which acts as shifting, unpredictable dead weight, the physical exertion required to lift, carry, and maneuver that bundle is immense.
You can't just toss it in a sedan.
It is not something that can be easily thrown into the trunk of a small car by a single person without intense struggle and a massive risk of drawing attention.
It requires serious leverage, physical strength, and a specific type of vehicle.
Preferably one with a low loading lip and a large flat cargo area.
Which brings us directly to the witness statements regarding vehicles. Through the painstaking process of gathering those 777 statements, the police identified 3 highly suspicious vehicles operating in the immediate area during that crucial 35-hour dark window.
3 distinct sightings.
First, there was a black Ford Granada seen cruising in the residential area on the night of Thursday, November 14th, the exact night Vera disappeared.
Then, significantly, multiple witnesses reported seeing a white transit van parked for lengthy spells at the desolate Two Bridges fly-tipping location on Friday, November 15th.
The day completely bridging the murder and the subsequent fire.
Finally, there were 2 highly distinct sightings of a light-colored Ford Fiesta at roughly 5 a.m. on the morning of Saturday, November 16th.
Just 30 minutes before, the member of the public reported the fire to emergency services.
This Fiesta was spotted near the entrance to Hull Farm, which is directly across the bridge from the illegal dump site.
Witnesses reported seeing this light-colored Fiesta accelerate aggressively and drive off at high speed onto the farm estate, disappearing into the dark.
This triad of vehicle sightings allows investigators to construct a highly plausible, hypothetical, logistical timeline of the killer's movements.
How does the van fit in?
The police had already established a working theory based on rigorous witness accounts of the fly-tipping site itself. Regular commuters and dog walkers who passed the Two Bridges area stated definitively to police that the rolled carpet and the body were absolutely not at the site prior to 4 p.m. on Friday, November 15th.
Okay, so the drop happens after 4 p.m.
Therefore, by deduction, the killer had the body stored, likely already rolled in the garden carpet, at a secondary secure location for at least 22 hours following the murder.
Waiting for the right time.
The presence of the white transit van parked for lengthy spells at the site on the 15th perfectly matches the logistical requirement of a perpetrator methodically scouting the location.
A transit van is the absolute ideal vehicle for transporting a 9 by 8 foot carpet containing over 100 pounds of dead weight.
The killer may have used the spacious van to covertly drop the body at the desolate site in the late afternoon or evening of the 15th under the cover of fading light, blending in with the surrounding debris.
Then we have the light-colored Ford Fiesta seen speeding away at 5 a.m. on the 16th.
Setting a fire in a damp November environment requires an accelerant, a source of ignition, and time for the flames to catch.
You can't just strike a match and leave.
It is highly plausible that the killer returned to the site hours after the initial heavy transport drop, this time using a smaller, more nimble, and less conspicuous passenger vehicle like the Fiesta.
They returned in the freezing dead of night to commit the arson.
Pouring the accelerant, igniting the clothing, and fleeing the scene at high speed just as the flames began to illuminate the dark, leading to the 5:30 a.m. emergency call.
So what does this all mean? When you visualize this entire agonizing sequence, it reveals a terrifying psychological profile of the hours following the murder.
It shows a perpetrator violently oscillating between extreme, adrenaline-fueled panic and cold, methodical calculation.
They commit a brutal strangulation. They frantically search their environment and find a discarded carpet in a yard to hide the body.
They sit with that horrifying reality in a secure location for an entire day.
They methodically scout a dumping ground in a commercial van. They execute the physically demanding transport of the heavy, awkward evidence.
And then they return hours later, in the freezing early morning, to meticulously arrange the victim's clothing in a pile and set the fire to destroy the forensic link.
The police released all of this granular information to the public. They publicized the exact dimensions of the carpet, the radiator holes, the weeds, the vehicle descriptions.
And the public actually responded.
Following the February 1997 appeal, almost 40 people contacted Thames Valley Police, specifically with information regarding that exact type of carpet.
40 solid leads on the carpet alone.
Yet, despite the massive dragnet, the extensive house searches, the grueling arrests of the husbands, the precise description of the fossilized carpet, and the specific vehicle sightings, the leads eventually ground to a halt.
The momentum just faded.
The massive momentum of the investigation slowly dissipated, leading the family and the local community into a grim judicial conclusion and an agonizing wait that would span decades.
The transition from an active, urgent homicide investigation with 80 dedicated officers to a dormant cold case is rarely a single moment.
It's a gradual thing.
It is a slow bleed of resources, marked by a formal, legal cessation of immediate hope. We see this manifested clearly in the bureaucratic events of the summer and autumn of 1997.
Starting with the funeral.
On June 20th, 1997, over 7 months after her brutal murder, Vera Holland's funeral was finally permitted to be held at the Reading Crematorium in Caversham.
7 months.
The severe delay in releasing the body for the funeral is a stark, painful reminder of how long her remains were legally held by the state as primary forensic evidence, undergoing repeated examinations.
Then, on October 16, 1997, the official legal inquest was held.
An inquest is a formal, public legal inquiry overseen by a coroner to legally establish the facts surrounding a sudden, violent, or suspicious death.
The East Berkshire coroner, a man named Robert Wilson, officially recorded a verdict of unlawful killing, which was a formality.
But it was the highly unusual statement Coroner Wilson made on the public record during that inquest that is truly chilling.
He stated, in his official capacity, "It looks like the person who did this will get away with it."
Let us examine the immense, crushing weight of that statement.
It's shocking for an official to say that out loud.
It is incredibly rare and profoundly discouraging for an official of the state, a coroner who has meticulously reviewed all the medical pathology and police investigative evidence, to declare publicly, less than a year after the crime, that justice is highly unlikely to be served.
It implies a total, devastating exhaustion of the physical evidence.
It implies that every single forensic swab, Every drop of blood drawn, every fingerprint lifted, and every single one of the 777 witness statements had been analyzed, cross-referenced, and pushed to their absolute scientific limits.
Yielding absolutely nothing that could sustain a prosecution in a court of law. It is a devastating final blow to the grieving family.
And so the active case goes cold. It sits in the dusty archives of Thames Valley Police for nearly 20 years.
But the timeline of grief for a family does not pause, even when the police investigation does.
That brings us forward to November 2016, which marked the solemn 20th anniversary of Vera's murder.
On this anniversary, two of her children bravely stepped forward to make a renewed, highly public appeal for information, standing alongside active representatives of the Thames Valley Police.
It was during this specific 2016 media appeal that a new, deeply unsettling name was introduced into the public narrative of this case.
Christopher Halliwell.
When directly questioned by the press about a possible connection between Vera's unsolved murder and the imprisoned serial killer Christopher Halliwell, the head of the Thames Valley Police's major crime review team made a carefully worded, deliberate statement.
He responded that investigators would keep Halliwell in mind.
The public mention of a convicted serial killer like Christopher Halliwell provides crucial insight into the complex methodology of modern cold case investigations.
They have to cast a wider net.
When a localized case remains completely unsolved for decades, investigators cannot simply rely on the original, exhausted suspect pool of local residents and family members.
They must utilize national databases to retroactively cross-reference their unsolved case files with the timelines, geographic movements, and known modus operandi of highly dangerous offenders who were caught, heavily investigated, and convicted of similar violent crimes in the years that followed the original murder.
Christopher Halliwell is a convicted serial killer who operated extensively in the wider geographic region, and evaluating his potential involvement is standard, rigorous, absolutely necessary investigative practice for cold case units.
Police analysts must ask highly specific questions. Was this known offender operating a specific type of vehicle, perhaps a transit van or a Ford Granada, in the Reading area in November 1996?
Does the method of killing manual strangulation with blunt force trauma match his known psychological and physical profile?
Does the specific method of disposal, transporting the body to a desolate rural location and utilizing fire as a countermeasure, align with his established behavioral patterns?
By stating publicly they would keep Halliwell in mind, the police were officially acknowledging that the parameters of the investigation had permanently expanded far beyond the immediate inner circle and the local community of Shinfield Rise.
Entering the realm of regional serial predation.
And the investigative developments did not stop with the 20th anniversary appeal and the mention of Halliwell.
Just a few months later, in January of 2017, Thames Valley Police made a startling, unexpected public announcement.
They revealed that brand new witnesses had come forward with fresh information, and that this new intelligence had led to further, highly active investigations by the cold case team.
However, they also simultaneously confirmed that, despite this influx of new information, no arrests had been made.
Think deeply about the psychological implications of new witnesses coming forward more than 2 full decades after a crime has been committed.
It is a fascinating, complex human phenomenon. Why do people wait 20 years to speak to the police?
In cold cases, it almost always speaks to shifting loyalties and the deterioration of protective relationships.
A person who confidently provided a false alibi to officers in 1996 may have been fiercely covering for a spouse, a protective sibling, or a close friend out of deep fear, financial dependence, or misguided loyalty.
20 years later, a bitter divorce, a profound estrangement, or the natural death of the perpetrator might suddenly shatter that loyalty.
Finally, freeing them to speak the truth without fear of immediate reprisal.
Alternatively, it speaks to the profoundly corrosive nature of a guilty conscience. Carrying the knowledge of a brutal, unsolved murder, or the direct knowledge of exactly who committed it, is a massive psychological burden.
Sometimes, as people age, face their own mortality, and gain a different perspective on life, the desperate internal need to unburden themselves and provide closure to a grieving family finally outweighs their lingering fear of the legal consequences.
The fact that entirely new, viable avenues of inquiry could be opened in 2017 underscores a fundamental universal truth about long-term homicide investigations.
The passage of time is a severe double-edged sword.
While time undeniably degrades physical evidence, DNA samples deteriorate in storage, witness memories become clouded by age, physical landscapes are paved over and changed forever. Time can also thoroughly dismantle the psychological and social barriers that protect the guilty.
The tight-knit social structures, the fear-based relationships, and the domestic dynamics that successfully shielded the perpetrator from the 1996 dragnet may completely cease to exist decades later.
We have meticulously traced a timeline that begins with the most mundane routine of human activities.
The shared physical labor of a morning milk delivery round, a completely standard 3-minute walk for an evening meal.
We have examined how that simple routine was violently shattered, leading to the unprecedented deployment of 80 officers, the processing of over 100 forensic swabs from a sealed family home, and the intense, desperate scrutiny of a discarded garden carpet bearing the indentations of old furniture.
We have seen how the scope of the investigation expanded from the frantic arrests of former domestic partners to the tracking of phantom vans and speeding cars in the dark, and eventually to the chilling cross-referencing of convicted serial offenders on national databases.
Yet, despite the meticulous forensic analysis, the massive public appeals, the distribution of thousands of leaflets, and the sudden emergence of new witnesses 20 years later, the ultimate truth remains obscured.
We must objectively report, based strictly on the available evidence, that the scales of justice in this matter remain entirely unbalanced.
We have journeyed through the sheer, overwhelming volume of data, the thousands upon thousands of hours of grueling police work, and the relentless, heartbreaking endurance of a family seeking answers for a mother who stepped out of her front door for a 3-minute walk and never returned.
It is a stark, chilling reminder of exactly how fragile our daily normalcy truly is.
It really is.
As we conclude our examination of these sources, I want you to consider a final lingering thought. Think about the invisible forensic footprints we all leave in our wake every single day as we move through the world.
We leave traces everywhere.
Think about the heavy indentations a piece of furniture leaves on a carpet in a spare bedroom, the discarded weeds in a garden, or the precise, unvarying route you take on your evening walk.
The things we never think twice about.
Consider how the most entirely mundane objects in our environment, a brightly colored coat, a piece of old, discarded flooring, a white van parked on a dark rural road can, in a fraction of a second, be permanently and violently transformed.
They cease to be just the background noise of our lives.
They are suddenly thrust into the center of a massive investigation, becoming the only silent, unblinking witnesses to a tragedy. Thanks for listening.